I know most of you, but for those that I don't know, I'm Tullian. Down to business, Ephesians chapter 2. I'm going to read just these two verses. Although these two verses fall within a powerful context of 10 verses, namely Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, in which the Apostle Paul in this entire section talks about the rich mercy of God which brought us alive from the dead. And in verses 8 and 9, he says, and these are some relatively well-known verses, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." We have spent the last 4 weeks talking about the importance of knowing what we believe and why we believe it. And while there are a variety of beliefs within Christianity, there are a variety of different positions within Christianity that Christians may differ on. Baptism, Lord's Supper, how a church should be governed, worship style, and so on and so forth. The essential truth of Christianity was summed up in 5 phrases during the 16th century, and we've been looking at these. And those 5 phrases were simply the Bible alone, grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, and God's glory alone. And so we've been spending the last 4 weeks unpacking those because those phrases really do sum up the core of what Christians believe. Even though, as I mentioned, we may differ on a variety of other things. Baptists think one way and Presbyterians think another way, and Lutherans and Methodists and non-denominational folks and all of that stuff. All of their differences fall within the umbrella or under the umbrella of Christianity. But the one thing that really unites all is a core, summarized conviction and commitment to the Bible alone, grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, God's glory alone. And I mentioned 2 weeks ago that the Bible is not concerned with answering all of our questions. Sometimes we treat it that way. We come with 1,000 different questions about life, about marriage, about work, about career, about parenting, whatever the case may be. We come to the Bible with 1,000 different questions, and we expect the Bible to answer all of the questions that we come to it with. But the Bible is not concerned with answering all of our questions. Rather, it's designed to answer one question. And that one question that the Bible is designed to answer is, how are we made right with God? How is someone made right with God? In theological terms, how are we justified? How are we rescued? How are we saved? How are we made right with God? And those 5 phrases that I just read summarize the Bible's answer to that question. The Bible alone tells us that we are made right with God by grace alone, through faith alone, in the finished work of Christ alone, so that God alone gets all the glory for our rescue. And the alone, the word alone in all of those phrases is the key word because it puts all of the emphasis on God's movement toward us, not our movement toward Him. Much of Christianity these days, sadly, in my opinion, much of Christianity these days is sort of revolves around this idea that it is our responsibility primarily to move toward God. That Christianity is all about our movement toward God. It's about my climb toward God. But in the 16th century, they wanted to make it very, very clear that the essence, the core of Christianity is not about our movement toward God, but rather God's movement toward us. It puts all the weight, all of the accent, the spotlight on God's action for us, not our action for God. After all, Hebrews 12:2 says that Jesus is the author or the initiator and the finisher or the completer of our faith. That He is the author and the finisher of our faith. So God's rescue of us begins and ends with God's love and God's power and God's initiative, not ours. And it doesn't just start that way, it continues that way. It's a gift that we receive. It's not a work that we achieve. And that includes faith. The third phrase, faith alone. We looked at the Bible alone for 2 weeks. We looked at grace alone last week, and this week now we look at faith alone. Faith in what Jesus has done is the instrument by which we access all of his work for us. Okay, I'm going to say that again, and then we're going to unpack it. Faith in what Jesus has done is the instrument by which we access all of his work for us. And because of that, some people have concluded that faith is our contribution. Okay, so God does all of this stuff. He moves toward us. He initiates love toward us. But it is our work of faith that gets access to it. So they've concluded that faith is our work. It's our contribution. While God has done everything necessary for us, we must bring faith to the table. Faith is our work. That's what some have concluded. But Paul corrects that idea here. Notice what he says. For by grace you have been saved through faith. Okay, now I like to say that the merit mongers love this verse because they automatically assume, aha, we've been looking for what contribution we make to the equation, and there it is, right there. Paul gives it. Yes, it is by grace we are saved, but it's through faith, and that belongs to us. And so they think, okay, God's taken us 99 yards, but it's our faith that gets us into the end zone. And so God has done almost everything, but we don't get access to anything God has done until we bring faith to the table. Well, Paul knows that's what you're going to think. And so he adds a little parenthetical phrase right after he says, it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And because he knows that's what we think, or we're going to think, he says, but even that is a gift from God. And the reason that even that, the gift of faith, is a gift from God, is because if you contributed just one small, tiny thing to your rescue, you would boast about it. And so he says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, so that no one can boast. No one can take credit for earning God's love. No one can say, well, God loves me because I'm lovable. Or God rescued me because I'm rescuable. No one can say that. And Paul wants to make that very, very clear. In fact, earlier on in this chapter, chapter 2, he diagnoses the entire human race by saying, we all came into this world spiritually dead. Any notion that we come into this world basically good people is demolished, okay, in this passage. Paul demolishes it. Notice what he says. And you, speaking of all of us, were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath. Okay, I mean, this is a pretty dire diagnosis that he's giving all of us. So if you've been taught over the course of your life that you're a basically good guy, you're a basically good person, yeah, you're not perfect, but at the core of who you are, you're good. Paul says, you're crazy, okay? You're nuts. People look at children. I always love the people who say, yeah, but look at the innocence of children. I'm like, you clearly don't have children, okay, if you think that. There is nothing and no one on planet Earth more selfish than an infant who screams bloody murder at 3 o'clock in the morning for food. They don't care if you're sleeping or not. They don't care whether or not you need rest. They need something and they want it now, okay? So you don't have to look past infancy to see human selfishness and self-centeredness. Well, despite our own experience and realizing that we're not born basically good, just in case we might be tempted to think that, Paul makes it very clear here. We actually are born children of wrath, he says, at enmity with God. That's how we come into this world. Well, that's a pretty serious situation. It's a dire diagnosis. But notice again where all of the emphasis lies, beginning in verse 4. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, he, God, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. The entire emphasis, the accent is put squarely on God's action for us. God's movement toward us. We're not sick in need of a doctor. We are dead in need of resurrection. And God does that. God alone does that, which is what Paul says very clearly here. So when we get down to verse 8 and 9, and he says, all of this saving that happens by grace through faith. And up until verse 8, we're demolished. We realize we bring nothing but death to the table. The only thing we contribute to our salvation is the sin that makes it necessary. That's what he's been making clear. But then we get down to verse 8, and we're like, whoa, wait a second. There's good news here. I do play a small part. I bring faith to the table. And Paul says, just hold time out. Hold on. Not true. Even that is a gift from God. So you could put it this way. While God has done everything necessary for us, the idea that we must bring faith to the table or that faith is our work is a misnomer, because even the faith in God's work for us that we must exercise is itself a work of God for us. Okay, I'll say that again. Even the faith in God's work for us that we must exercise is itself a work of God for us. And the reason this is so important is because only the God-given gift of faith has Jesus as its object. That's why this is so important. Some people make a distinction between people of faith and people who aren't of faith. So I've had numerous conversations over the years where people might ask me, are you a person of faith? And the obvious answer to that is, well, of course. I'll say, are you a person of faith? Well, no, not really. That's just not true. Okay, there's no such thing as people of faith and people who are not of faith. Every person is a person of faith. We all have faith. It's impossible to live 1 minute of the day without exercising some sort of faith. We all have faith, but it's what we place our faith in that makes all the difference in the world. So the question is not whether you are a person of faith. The question is, what is the object of your faith? What are you putting your faith in? Or who are you putting your faith in? And the God-given gift of faith that Paul talks about here is the only faith that has Jesus as its object. And it's this faith alone that gives us possession of everything Jesus secured for us. Forgiveness, love, meaning, purpose, approval, hope, righteousness, and so on and so forth. So without faith in Jesus, we are left trying to secure all of those things on our own in 1,000 different ways. We try to secure forgiveness on our own. We try to secure love on our own by what we do, by who we become, by what we can get people to think about us, by the way that we look. We try to secure approval on our own. We try to secure rightness on our own. Without faith in Jesus, who gives us all of that stuff for free, we try to get it ourselves. In other words, without faith in Jesus, we have no choice but to put faith in ourselves, and that never ends well, ever. Almost everything in this world, and sadly, everything in the church, encourages you to put your faith in you. Almost everything, across the board. You have what it takes to meet life's greatest challenges and win life's greatest battles. Trust in yourself. Believe in yourself. If you have faith in yourself, anything is possible. That is the primary message that goes out everywhere you look. Every place you see, everything you hear, that's the primary message that's going out. I read some quotes yesterday just to verify that I wasn't overreacting. Here are just a couple. If you're going to put trust in one person, let it be yourself. Yeah, that's what I said. Believe in yourself, another one. Trust yourself to do what your heart is guiding you to do. That's the worst, okay? I was like, is this person delusional? This is clearly a person that does not know themselves very well. Just trust your heart. The prophet Jeremiah says, that's a big mistake. Why? Because the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can know it? Jeremiah says. The heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart, as Winston Churchill said. So this idea that we can trust ourselves because our hearts are basically good and our intuitions are right and clean is a farce. Just look at the world around you. Pretty much everybody is doing what they want to do. Okay? Everybody's following their heart. Well, what does our world now look like as a result of that? And what has it looked like for hundreds and hundreds of years? The verifiable evidence that this is a farce is all around us. All around us. I love this one. Believe in yourself and you will be unstoppable. The best, and I mean hands down the best, was the subtitle of a book that I saw, which literally, this was the subtitle. It's a terrible marketing tool, by the way, because the subtitle is supposed to be short, not as long as this. That being said, listen to how ridiculous this is. Believe in yourself and the universe will be forced to believe in you. I don't even know what that means. As if my greatest need is for the universe to believe in me. All of this stuff may sound empowering at first, it's inspirational. In a sense, it's kind of telling me without telling me that I am my own God. I can do it myself. I can make it happen on my own. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. Where did that first come into this world? Genesis chapter 3. What did the serpent say to Adam and Eve? Did God tell you that you can't eat from any of these trees? Which was a lie. They said, no, he just said we couldn't eat from this tree, but all the others we could eat from. And then he says, well, you know why he doesn't want you to eat from that tree? Because he knows that the moment you do, you will be just like him, and you won't need him anymore. And why would you choose to live dependent on God when you can be independent and be your own God? That's how this whole thing started. And from that point forward, we have been playing God. Playing God. doing what we want to do, deciding what we think is best, determining for ourselves what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false, so on and so forth. This idea that we can be our own God, so to speak, may sound empowering at first, but you and I both know it is ultimately enslaving. Ultimately. Faith in yourself never ends well. It is a dead end, and you know it, which is why we laugh when I read quotes like that. When you're on the brink of despair, okay, when you're experiencing a dark night of the soul, when things around you and things inside of you seem to be unraveling, turning to yourself or your inner strength or whatever you want to call it will bring you no hope. It will bring you no rescue. It will bring you no relief. The quotes I read are the equivalent of giving a drowning man swimming lessons. Paddle harder. Kick faster. Rick is a lifeguard. Does that work? No. If you just shout from your lifeguard stand to someone who's drowning, just paddle straight. No. But that's what those quotes are essentially suggesting. Faith in ourselves assumes that we have the internal power to get things right and to secure the things we need most. The problem with that is we don't. We don't have the internal power to get things right and secure the things we need most. When we feel disappointed with life, when we can't overcome our bad habits or addictions, when we are paralyzed by the guilt of failing to be the mother we needed to be, when we want to be loved but we're still single, when we hit midlife and realize we aren't where we thought we'd be, when we're contemplating the mess-ups that we can't change and plagued by the guilt of those things, when you can't seem to get over the fact that he left you, when we are grieving the death of someone we love, all of those things. Does faith in your ability and strength help you? Of course it doesn't. Of course not. Why? Because the things that matter most, we can never make happen on our own. Maybe you'll get a raise by working 80 hours a week, but you can't make your coworkers respect you. You can work hard to look good and be sweet, but you can't make him love you. You can do everything possible to impress your coach, but you can't make him fill the void left by the dad who never encourages you. You can become successful in your career, but you can't make your daughter proud of you. You can say you're sorry 1,000 times, but you can't make your son forgive you. You see, when it comes to the stuff that matters most, faith in yourself will fail you 10 times out of 10. The deepest longings of the human soul, love, forgiveness, security, meaning, deep cleansing and wholeness, all of those things, the deepest longings of the human soul transcend the resources that you have in yourself. And you know that to be true experientially. You know it, which is why people pay so much money to go and sit in self-help seminars and sit under the speaking of motivational speakers, because it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. It makes you feel like things are going to be okay for a short period of time. But then life happens. And all the noise goes away and you're left with just yourself. And you're left with your thoughts, and you're left with your guilt, and you're left with your shame, and you're left with your failures, and you're left with your insecurities, and you're left with your fears. And in those moments, you realize there has to be something outside of me. There has to be something bigger than me that alone can set me free and rescue me. That means that the only hope we have for ourselves is to give up hope in ourselves. There is no freedom. It sounds really negative, doesn't it? To say the only hope you have for yourself is to give up hope in yourself, doesn't it? Because we have been brainwashed into thinking that hope in ourself is our salvation. Hope in ourself is where rescue happens. Belief in me is what will get me to the other side and get me through this season. Mustering up the strength that I have inside of me, that's what will get me through. Has it? Really, in the biggest ways, in the deepest existential ways, has it? It can't. To put it plainly, the answer is not the elimination of faith, but the transfer of faith from me and what I can do and what I can provide for myself to Jesus, what he has done and what he fully provides for me. That's the answer. It's not the elimination of faith. That's not even possible. It's the transfer. Transfer of trust from myself, my resources, my ability, my strength, my capabilities to Jesus. His strength, his accomplishments, and those sorts of things. Faith in Jesus alone involves two confessions. I can't and God can. That's it. That's what real living faith looks like. That's the confession that it makes. I can't. I can't. I cannot ensure that my kids are going to turn out okay. I cannot ensure that he or she will love me till death do us part. I can't ensure and I can't control whether or not I'll be able to retire at a certain age because I will have made enough wise financial decisions to put myself in that kind of good financial position. I can't. We think we can control a lot more than we can. And we think we have the capacity to provide for ourselves much more than we actually can. Well, the good news of the gospel, and that's what gospel means, good news, and there's a reason it's called good news, because it's supposed to alleviate us, set us free, remove the burden. The good news only sounds good when it's put up against the bad news that we can't do it. So, faith in Jesus is a dual confession. I can't. God can. Christianity, and I sort of, for various reasons, kind of grew up believing this, but Christianity, or I grew up believing that Christianity was fundamentally for good people, you know? Good people are Christian people, and non-Christian people are bad people. So how do we determine good people from bad people? Well, do you go to church? If you do, you're a good person. If you don't, you're a bad person, okay? And I kind of grew up with this idea that Christianity is for good people. And because I knew very well that I wasn't good, I didn't think Christianity was for me at all. And it wasn't until later on that I realized Christianity is not good advice for strong people. It's not even good advice for good people. It's good news for bad people. People who can't make it on their own and who perpetually fall short of God's standard of perfection, which is all of us. So if you've heard me say anything at all, if you've ever listened to anything I've ever said, then you will know that I've said on numerous occasions that God loves and uses bad and weak people who fail because there aren't any other kinds of people. So this twin confession that I can't and God can, it sets you free from the burden of trying to get for yourself all that Jesus freely gives you. It liberates you from needing the imperfect approval and affection of others, which, believe it or not, we spend most of our life trying to secure. It sets us free from that because Jesus has already given God's perfect approval and affection to us. So faith in Jesus, Jesus as the object of our faith, gives us access to everything Jesus secured for us. And that faith that we must exercise to get access to that stuff is itself a gift from God. So it is all of grace from beginning to end. Let me just conclude with this. I have an old friend who wrote this in a devotional that he published about 9 years ago. And I think this sums up precisely what Paul is saying here regarding the object of our faith and how faith in ourselves ultimately falls short. This friend of mine says, we all look for it. We all refuse to live without it. What is it that I'm talking about? Well, here it is. All human beings are on a search somehow, some way, to find that solid rock on which to stand. That one thing they can bank on. That one thing that will keep them upright when the storms of life are raging. That one thing that will remain firm for the duration. That one thing that will give them security when nothing else does. No human being enjoys feeling that he is living in the sinking sand of unpredictability, disappointment, and danger with no rock to reach for and stand on. We long for our lives to make sense. We long to have meaning and purpose, and we long to have lasting stability. But in our quest for stability, we attempt to stand on an endless catalog of God replacements that end up sinking with us. There is, he says, a rock to be found. There is a rock that will give you rest when everything else you are looking to for security has been taken away. That rock is Jesus. And you were hardwired to find what you are seeking in him. He is the rock for which you are longing. He is the one who alone is able to give you the sense that all is well. And as you abandon your hope in the mirage rocks of this fallen world, you will find that he has already reached out and placed you on solid ground. Or as St. Augustine put it, we were made for you, O God, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you. Pascal called it a God-shaped void that only God is big enough to fill. So the hope that you long for when everything seems to be falling apart will not come from discovering the hero within, but from knowing that you have already been discovered by the hero without. Let's pray together.